Our next guest is Sandra Navidi. She's the founder and chief executive officer of Beyond Global LLC, an international strategic consultancy. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, Sandra.
Thank you for having me, Sophie.
I know it has been a busy week because your new book comes out this week, Wie tickt Amerika. So maybe, first of all, you can explain to us why you're so excited about this book, or what is especially important to you about this.
If I may, this is the cover. The DNA of the USA, What Makes America Tick, has been a true passion project for me because I've lived here for a quarter of a century. I'm coming from a mixed background. My father's Iranian. I was socialized in Germany, but I've also seen how my Iranian family has suffered from their country being turned into a theocracy. And so I've seen, many unbelievable things happen. Mm-hmm. And I just felt sort of a duty to warn about what may be ahead in the United States, but also kind of explain how the United States got here, because it's so incredible. Like, why do so many Americans believe in fake news? And so I try to explain it with history, with culture, with American values, and I've done a lot of research and was quite surprised myself in many different respects. Has been a learning experience for me, and I think that I kind of put a bow around it, and I think I feel I do explain how and why we got to where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very interesting. When I think of you, I think of someone who is incredibly well connected to decision makers. You have talked to many very important people. You are an international attorney. You're a best-selling author. We just talked about it, a consultant, media contributor, public speaker. So many things happening at the same time. And I know you're also regularly a visitor or a guest at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And I would just kind of love to get a little insight into that. How do decision makers and leaders look at the current state of the world? What are the big, most urgent issues that everyone's talking about? I'm assuming inflation, maybe the war on Ukraine, maybe what's going to happen in the US with the upcoming elections. So maybe you can just give us an idea what's happening in these circles right now.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The crucial points that you just highlighted are on the minds of decision makers. The World Economic Forum in Davos was canceled in January, where it typically takes place because of Omicron. Mm-hmm. And then it took place in May for mm-hmm. the first time during sort of the summer or late spring. So that was really nice. But I would say most decision makers were very concerned about the confluence of risks exacerbating each other in mm-hmm. feedback loops, and basically all pointing to the downside. So we are faced with a dangerous situation, and it's kind of surreal also because many CEOs who were in Davos or who I see here in New York, their companies had great results. They have been thriving throughout right. Corona because of government support measures and so forth. So it's kind of a twofold. It's kind of weird, but everybody's very afraid of what's to come.
Yeah. Since you wrote that book, it's interesting to me how worried everyone is, or how big of a topic and concern is Trump being reelected to the global community, if you want.
Yeah, I think here in the United States, CEOs are very concerned, even those who were supportive off him before because of tax cuts, because of deregulation, because they're hyper Republicans. But most of those CEOs or decision makers, people in power, have come to the conclusion that the system that we have lived in, the post-war system, has been very good for them, has made them very prosperous, very wealthy and powerful. And they don't really want to lose that system. So they're kind of in a, between a rock and a hard place. They don't want to support the Democrats necessarily.
Yeah.
Those previous Republican Trump supporters,
Sure.
but they don't want Trump and they don't want an extremist candidate. So I would say most Americans who are moderate have sort of left, Republicans who are moderate have left the party or have been sort of kicked out more or less. Globally, I feel that the risks in the United States aren't fully realized, only because we only have a certain bandwidth of things that we can digest and occupy our minds with. And in Europe, it's inflation, it's the currency union, it's the war with Ukraine, other geopolitical risks. And there's so much going on here every single day. Even the details and all the names and the relationships and what is connected with what gets lost on people who live here. And that was also part of why I wanted to write the book, to highlight the most important points and put them together. But I do think that Trump and the risk of another Republican extremist candidate being elected is people haven't realized it yet worldwide, how large it is and what it would actually mean, which my conclusion is fascist tendencies and autocratic rule.
Mm-hmm. That sounds horrifying. I would say not surprising, but still shocking. How do you experience talking to these important people, to decision makers? How does that work? Do you, I don't know, is it phone calls or do you meet at certain events? And how do you get a feeling for what they have to say? And we're gonna later on talk about super hubs and what they are, but I think it kind of leads into that topic. So like, how is it to talk to these people?
Well, there was very little association during the corona pandemic because most of these decision makers are older. They have the means to communicate with everybody. Everyone wants to communicate with them, so they work mostly remotely, and everything in New York was pretty much canceled. Now people are coming out. They're actually very eager to meet in person. When I talk to decision makers, I don't censor myself because I'm completely independent. But it's surprising to see what people are willing to say behind the scenes. They actually think when they're with their peers, not even necessarily just talking to me, but talking to their peers. And I'm witnessing it. And there are no journalists who they are afraid may actually publish what they say. And so I think there's a big discrepancy of what people actually think and say behind the scenes and what they say in public. So that is a surprising element. And other than that, I think mostly we're of very similar opinions.
I want to talk to you about something that I feel like is relevant to this summit, and you've talked about it in your book, Super Hubs. So I know you probably have it there with you. So if you don't mind showing us the title, Super Hubs, there you go. You referred to the best connected people within global high finance as super hubs. And in this book, you identify 147 company representatives, primarily from the financial sector, who kind of act as a global core, influencing businesses and companies and hence the business world. And it is these strong and usually very personal relationships too, between the same, usually male actors that make up this power structure. So it sounds like women are missing from the table. What does that mean for all of us, for everyone, for the business world, when these structures are predominantly male?
Well, this number that you quoted, the 147 companies, that's actually from a study by the ETF, the university in Zurich, and they came to this result with, very complicated, complex computer algorithmic work. So this is kind of, the result of research. That's not just my opinion or something that I've found. So it's totally true. I would say it shows that women to this day, because this book was published in German, Superhubs in German in 2016, in English 2017, and then other languages. Since then, nothing much has changed. In some respects, we're seeing even fewer women than at that time. And what it means is that women typically to this day are still not as plugged into the networking and power and information channels to the same extent that men are. And that's why at the entry level, yes, you see more diversity, more women, more minorities, but the higher you go up in the food chain, the fewer women become. And in many respects, like in Silicon Valley, they have left in large numbers, because even though it's much younger men, there's still a kind of bro culture that discriminates against women. And it's not always like the discrimination of the 50s, the drastic discrimination, because laws have become, more stricter. Discrimination has become more subtle, which makes it just as unpleasant and as, has a bad influence on women's career.
Yeah. And since you're talking about a woman's career, and to kind of bring the conversation back to you, you personally know some of these people, you're in touch with them. Before founding Beyond Global, you worked with the NYU, so the New York University economics professor Rubini at his advisory firm, Rubini Global Economics, as director of research strategies and senior relationship manager. And if I may say so, you do move in these circles in this world full of men. So like you're really used to it, and you do that with so much ease, it looks like. And how long did it take to actually feel the way you might feel right now, and to feel this, to have this feeling of, I am here, I have a seat at the table, it's an important seat at the table, and I deserve to be here. And you sit at these tables and you probably know more than, I don't know, 75% of the people sitting there. So has that ever been a thought for you, or an issue at all, that you thought about you being female in a surrounding like this?
Well, first of all, thank you for this very well-meaning characterization. Appearances can be deceiving. It's not always been easy. I have worked in New York for 20 years. I have really earned my stripes. I've not taken any shortcuts. I'm admitted to practice law in Germany. I'm also an attorney in the state of New York. I've worked in finance all my life on Wall Street, horrible hours every weekend, have been treated condescendingly in all men environments. That was 20 years ago. I don't think many of the things that happened then would fly today. For instance, I can type, and one of my first boss here, who should remain unnamed, but he always told me, why don't you stay? Can you stay a little longer on Friday evenings, over the weekend, just in case he needed something typed, because the secretaries had already left. And I was new in New York. I was risk averse. I had no idea, I was grateful for the opportunity. I had no idea what was acceptable. I figured it's his company, if he needs me to type a couple of pages, I have to do it. But things like that, I don't think I ever told anybody about this, but I mean, many other things, remarks, or that, inappropriate behavior at conferences. And it's always difficult for women to walk that fine line, where, because you're afraid if you, put someone off, he will take revenge.
It's going to retaliate, yeah.
Promoted, you may be fired, he may report you on something, you may make something up, colleagues may make something up. Gossip is a risk. So, but if you have earned your stripes, if you haven't taken any shortcuts, if you've got your degrees, you have performed well, you are not overly, you don't, people realize you don't try to use your female charms. You're kind of matter of fact, pleasant, but matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
All these types of things, then with time, your self-confidence grows, because mine wasn't always there. And I, to this day, have a chip on my shoulders. I write in the book how when I showed up at conferences with my former boss, Nuria Rubini, or just on my own, people would ask, so who are you here with?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you married to? And
Yeah.
then up and down, do you work? Yes. Or in Germany, I was there was a large board, a board meeting at one of the biggest international banks with the board members, and their chief economist, and Nuriel and I walked down the steps, and he asked me, so what do? You are the translator? I'm like, no. And that was part of the reason why eventually also I left Nuriel's company, because I figured I'd always be seen or perceived as kind of like an annex, a support person. And to this day, sometimes I feel people who know me from that time still kind of view me that way. So, work hard, you have to gain respect. If you don't stand up for yourself, nobody else will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would have asked you that question if you can give some advice for young women, for women in established careers who maybe want to change something or go further or have to make a decision. So if you have anything to say or anything to tell about your career path, maybe about crucial points in your career where you really had to make a decision, which this sounds like a decision that you had to make, to leave that environment where you probably had a really interesting job as director of research strategies. And so that would be interesting to know what you can tell women in business and in career when it's time to make a decision, maybe, or how you do that, and what's really important when it comes to making a decision. What do you listen to?
It depends on where you are in your career. And by the way, I have another book, this is my second book, which I published last year, that specifically is about career advice. And there's an entire chapter for women. It's called The Future, in English, The Future IQ, in German, The Future Proof Mindset. And it's available, this one, on Amazon. It depends on where you are in your career, because I just talked to not the chief executive, but someone at the very top of an international conglomerate last week in Germany. Mm-hmm. And this person told me that when they interview, people at the entry level, this person doesn't do that anymore, but of course she hears from others in that company. Young people ask about work-life balance. Mm-hmm. And that person didn't really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And even though that's a valid point, that's something that we have to decide for ourselves and, discuss with ourselves. Don't bring that up in an interview. Mm-hmm. That you're thinking about your spare time when you're there to audition for work. And also, I wrote this book, Future IQ or Future Proof Mindset, because we are at an inflection point with digitization, with globalization, which may go a little in reverse, but still the economy is changing dramatically. And so I feel the career advice that may have still been valid even a decade ago, it has completely changed. So if you're in the beginning of your career, I think it's very important to kind of take inventory of what is the situation now, where are we going? Large parts of the world is going into a recession. What does that mean? That means competition is going to be a lot harder than before. Then the internet makes competition harder. I outsource now on platforms, where you can crowdsource people who like secretarial things, those sort of things, proofreading and that. And, I put out a job and I get dozens and dozens of people who audition for that single position. So my point is the internet has created lots of opportunities for us, but the competition is also tougher. Now, right now, we're in the fortunate positions somewhat, that there are more, especially in the United States, or particularly in the United States, where on every job offering, there are two people, almost 1.8 people or so, who try out for this job. So people here still have a choice, but that can change very quickly if we go into a recession. So I think the most important thing is inform yourself that what kind of jobs are relevant, are going to be relevant. What skills are necessary? What's your niche? What are your talent? Where do you offer added value? What's specific just to you? Then you should think about branding yourself. I kind of subconsciously did that 2 decades ago. I didn't think about, oh, I want to become a brand, but just, you know, in New York, I realized it's not only about who you know, it's also who knows you. People must remember you in order to buy your services, your product, take your phone call. So that's important. And with the internet, which can be, or social media, which can be a minefield, is something, you know, where women should think out a strategy. And then women who are in the middle of their careers, it depends on their personal situation. Are they married? Is there or do they have a partner? Is there a second income? Do they have a divorce settlement? Have they inherited money? In other words, do they have financial security, which is a whole nother issue that we could talk about, because many women don't have that, you know. So so there are many different points, and I think though, if at that stage when you've had, you know, some experience, when you have some experience under your belt, or the more experience you have, the more you should listen to your gut instinct. Because like when I wanted to start I was burning to start my own, go out on my own, start my company. And that was, you know, in the years following, that was 2011. So I started thinking about probably 9, 10. And those were the years after the financial crisis. It was still in full swing. And people said, no, don't do it now. There's an economic crisis. Who knows what's going to happen? But I thought, I'll try. And if I fail, you know, I'm still young enough. If I fail, I go back into the workforce. And it worked out. So I think you should have a plan B. You should assess your risk tolerance. You know, is it worth the trouble? Because in case of doubt, changing careers, changing jobs, moving to a different place, that all takes effort and has implications. Like I often meet people in Europe who say, oh, I'm so tired of being a doctor here, you know, the taxes and the this and the that. If I could, I would, you know, go to America. And I said, if you come to America, there's so many things you need to keep in mind, like health insurance, you know, all these sort of financial things, and then also taxation. I mean, my point is it's complex. You should make a plan and listen to yourself.
And do research. It sounds like do a lot of research. Sandra, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing these things with us. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Sophie. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.